Sounds good.
So Christina, after an introduction like that, I don't think anything else needs to be said. So at this point, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for having me. I really am humbled to be here because you are an expert in this field as well. So thanks for inviting me, and I'll try to do it justice. So as Andrew probably just mentioned, but I didn't hear because I got kicked off. I work for the Consulate General of Canada in Minneapolis, which falls under the umbrella of Global Affairs Canada, which is kind of like a combination of the US State Department and Commercial Service. So we have offices all over the globe. In the US, because Canada, the US is Canada's most important trading partner, we have 12 offices. So it includes 12 consulates across the country, as well as the embassy in Washington. And there are folks that do some ag tech work in the US, but not in every post. We call them posts, and I might say that again. But each post gets to choose what it focuses on based on the opportunities for Canadian companies in that market. So in my market of the upper Midwest, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, agriculture is a giant. And so that has always been one of the core areas of focus for our office. We also focus on life sciences and some clean technologies, but we're fairly small, just 17 people, 6 of whom are on the trade side. So today I was invited to talk to you about ag tech specifically, but I want to talk a little bit about Canadian agriculture in general first, just to give you a lay of the land, if you will. And so as you can see here, like the upper Midwest, agriculture is a giant for Canada, which is why it makes for such an interesting job. $112 billion. These are 2020 numbers. If you follow ag data at all, you know it lags horribly. But in 2020, $112 billion generated 1 in 8 jobs, which I think is the most easy to wrap your head around. And $100 billion in the food processing sector. Oops. And this is just a little bit more about why Canada is such a great partner, and why a lot of companies choose to do business there from the US as well. My job is really facilitating both directions, really low labor costs, some amazing programs for hiring talent, low corporate tax rates, and a huge exporter of some of these products that are getting more attention now than they ever have, right? Flax, canola, pulses, the plant protein industry, and then access to foreign markets. So especially in the last couple of years, like our trading relationships in the US have changed, and Canada has some that are different. So if you are doing business in Canada, you can access, for instance, the European market in a different and sometimes easier way. So we like to talk about that as well. This just breaks down the ag sector more, and I'm happy to share these slides afterwards if you like. This is a lot of information, but what I wanted to show was that across subsectors of agriculture and food, Canada is a really important partner. Similar again to the upper Midwest, like fantastic in crop production, but also livestock, horticulture, and food processing. So all of these segments make up for a very robust ag and food sector in Canada. And I also like to show the map because, quite honestly, before I held this job, I don't know that I could have put them all in perfect order, and I find that's true of most people. So you might know what provinces are right above you. You probably know British Columbia is on the far left, but I wanted to make sure and outline so that everybody can see where they sit in relation to Canada. So for me in Minnesota, we border Manitoba and Ontario. Saskatchewan is a border for North Dakota that we represent. So I work a lot in the prairies, but food processing is really big, especially in Quebec and Ontario. And so working with them as well. And really at the end of the day, my job is to work for all of Canada. So I've tried to get to know all of these regions very well. So just to dive a little more in on the food processing industry, and I know this is about ag tech, but I think this is important because ag tech, food tech, I mean, we could have a whole hour-long conversation about
Christina,
where the
part of the
lines
introduction was
yeah.
my entry point was the CPG and learning about the plate side of things rather than the farm gate. So perfect.
Cool.
Talk about it.
So this makes sense. Yeah, it's all tied together. I think sometimes we get very siloed and kind of forget to think about that, but I think it's very important to have a full understanding of the whole sector. So again, food processing is huge in Canada. It's their largest manufacturing segment. So 18% of GDP, and the main industries being meat manufacturing, dairy, beverage, bakeries, and tortillas. I'll focus on meat for just a moment because for us in the upper Midwest, this is a really important story. So a lot of livestock, especially in the pork segment, are, say, born in Canada, come down to feed in the US, maybe get processed here, maybe go up to Canada for some processing, are sold in both countries. It's a very interesting and sometimes frustrating segment because there's a lot of talk around how do we, decide where our food is from. And this is a perfect case of it's not that simple. And I don't know that it ever will be again. We really depend on each other for along the value chain, all these different elements. And then just in terms of trade, this is very telling, right? The huge parts of the pie are the US on both sides. So both as an export destination and as an origin of import goods, the US and Canada it's the biggest trading relationship in the world. And we really, really depend on one another. So now AgTech, I'm going to jump right in. This is just a smattering of AgTech companies in Canada. And I have to say, when I was putting this presentation together, and I had to do some digging on, not only who are all the companies, because I haven't worked with them all, but how many are there? And I found it to be almost 1,000. I was blown away. And I do this for my job, but I think that's an amazing number for a country whose population is 1/10 of the US. It really punches above its weight. So you might recognize some folks that you've heard of. I would say Milk
Christina,
Movement.
I'm going to interject right here. That was another reason that I was so excited when I first was introduced to you in Canada in general, is I was astounded how someone so tiny could have this great of an impact in ag innovation, food innovation. And the more I learned, it's just you outsmart people. I mean, you put really good people in there, you get a good North Star, and all oars are pulling in the same direction. And you were just laughing other folks. And I hope that you do point out Sostera in there. I'm not seeing it right now, but there is an investor in Baltimore named Matt. He's leading a black venture fund, very, very famous man, but he invested in one of your companies as well as an early investor.
Great.
He's very happy about that. It had something to do with grapes, I think Verde or something like that. I know that they got some money from California from SVJ as well.
Yeah, there's some really interesting viticulture technologies that have come out of Canada, but
I mean, you're absolutely less. I'm just going to emphasize that's great.
And I think I can talk about it in a moment, kind of the ecosystem builders that have made some of this possible. But I'll point out, because you did Sostera as an example of why it's been important to work with these companies from a US perspective. So this is a company that has pioneered the use of ultra high pressure water jets in no-till farming. And so it's a perfect application for this region in the upper Midwest. And it's a technology that was traditionally used to cut metal, but they've figured out how to use it in the ground to cut through the residue that forms over many years of tilling when you till your fields. And after many years, the residue means you don't get as many nutrients through, so you can apply and apply and apply, and you're losing some of the nutrients just to the fact that they don't get through. And so this is not very, it's not rocket science, but they've applied it in a way that really is making a difference for no-till farming and precision application of nutrients. So Sostera was part of a program I'll talk about in a moment that we run called the Canadian AgTech Accelerator, and they are now demonstrating this technology on farm in North Dakota and have some great partnerships set up there. I also want to talk about venture capital, because this is another important reason that we are tasked with the work we do in Minnesota. So this is a heat map of VC funding in Canada. It is not AgTech specific, but AgTech is one of the largest recipients in Canada. But it's nowhere near the size of US venture capital. And so most Canadian firms find if they really want to grow, they've got to look outside their borders. And we're lucky that they look to us oftentimes first, because we have a ton of venture capital in the US. It's growing in Canada, but we still in the US punch above our weight. And many, many firms find the capital they need to round out their rounds in the US. So as you can see, of course, it's not surprising Ontario and Quebec are the larger recipients. They also are the larger provinces in terms of population and density. But all across the map, venture capital is finding its way to Canada. And not surprisingly, a lot of it is US venture capital. So just a moment to talk about the Canadian ecosystem. These are all different organizations that are across Canada working in some way or another to further the food, ag, and ag tech, food tech industries. Some are provincially located. For instance, Zone AgTech is a Quebec-based entity that's all about building the Quebec ag tech ecosystem. Some are accelerators. So Cultivator, powered by Connexus, is a fairly new accelerator that's really, it's pan-Canadian, but it's based in the prairies. So it focuses on opportunities for companies to grow in that region. Emily is a machine learning initiative in Manitoba. So we've gotten to know them quite well because there's some cross-border conversations happening with them and some folks in North Dakota, and so on and so forth. You look any of these up, but I should point out too that behind all of this is the government engine as well, which has in many of these cases helped to fund and even begin some of these entities. And I think this is, Andrew, what you were alluding to. So Canada has made some big, bold decisions to invest in this sector, and I think it is paying off. So maybe 6 years ago now, no, it's probably been more like 7 or 8, Canada said, hey, we're actually falling behind in innovation. We're going to create something called a supercluster initiative, and we're going to put a whole bunch of money towards everyone's innovative ideas. And so over a period of a year, entities all over Canada got together, formed coalitions around ideas and segments of the economy that they felt had opportunity to grow, and then applied to become a supercluster. And this was a long process, but long story short, 5 superclusters were funded all across Canada and all across segments. And so I'll highlight that in food and ag, the one that has gotten the most attention is Protein Industries Canada, and they received $153 billion initially to then match with industry to grow that ecosystem. And so similar things have happened across Canada in other sort of innovation segments that have really allowed these companies to grow. And I think it's different. I don't see that as much in the US. We have many funding programs, but this was like an all hands on deck, all government on board effort to really jumpstart the innovation agenda in Canada. I should have said $153 million though, not billion.
Oh. Yeah, I wrote down 153. I'm like, wow, that was a big investment in terms of international, how much money you have there. But it shouldn't come as a surprise. For those of you who do or do not know, when quantum computing was just a theoretical phrase, Canada went out and found all the top researchers on the planet and gave them tenureship in Toronto. So before anyone even knew what quantum computing was, they'd already locked up the top talent on the planet. So again, punching with that weight class, outsmarting other people on the chessboard. So this is just part and parcel of it.
Yeah, and kind of putting some bold ideas on the table that could be a little risky, but at least in this case have panned out very nicely. Okay, so now I'm going to mention quickly this AgTech accelerator that I said something about earlier. So 4 years ago, well, no, let me back up. 10 years ago, the government of Canada said, we're going to start this Canadian Technology Accelerator program. It started in Silicon Valley, not surprisingly, with the consulate there. And so Canada started putting more effort into these sort of like high potential companies via cohorts that can be modeled as accelerators in many different ways. And so when it first started, it was mostly focused on IT, or there was fintech, clean tech. 4 years ago, AgTech, the AgTech Accelerator was born in San Francisco. And within short order, Minneapolis began working with them because we had also been starting to see the Canadian AgTech industry really boom. And we saw a lot of opportunities in our region. And we said, let's work together on this, because between California and the upper Midwest, we hit a lot of the huge ag segments in the US, from specialty crops to commodities and everything in between. And so this program has been running for 3 years. And it's like I said, a partnership between Minneapolis and San Francisco, sometimes LA. That's a long story about staffing. So for this year, it's not including LA. But we've brought in a cohort of 10 to 15 companies every year that are raising a seed to Series A within the next 12 months, have differentiated technology, are really focused on the US market. We like to see revenue generating, but I will say we always take a chance on a company or two for which we think the team and technology are excellent and worth a try. And then we also really look for companies that are willing to commit. So it's mostly virtual, partly because this whole program was born during COVID. But despite that, it's weekly, a couple hours every week that we expect C-level folks to show up and be part of this. And so people really have to be ready to commit. They have to have commitment from that top level, and they have to be coachable and willing to maybe turn their entire pitch deck on its head or rethink their whole go-to-market strategy. So we work with the companies over 6 months to do a number of things. I always think of it as in kind of 3 buckets. One bucket is tool building, so we help them understand, we bring in legal counsel to understand, how do you protect your IP? How do you think about tax implications when you cross the border and you hire people, or you have a bank account in one country and you're wanting to get money from another country? All the nuts and bolts, but really dig in deep, and we bring in tons of experts to talk about this. It is not just us by any stretch. The second bucket is mentorship. We pair every company with a mentor from one of the 2 regions based on what their technology is really suited for. So in the example of Sister, we paired them with a mentor here in Minnesota because it was all about row crops for them. And that mentor meets with them at least monthly. And then we bring them in market, which is what these pictures are about. And we get them in front of investors and potential companies. And we put their pitch deck to the test. We've spent lots of time pitch coaching and working through it over and over again. And then we give them the chance to really shine and hopefully make some deals. So last year we brought them to World AgTech in San Francisco, which is that top middle picture. We had a big Canadian presence there. We had time on the pitch stage for all of our companies, lots of B2B meetings. We also went to Fargo, North Dakota, and spent time on something called the Grand Farm, which is powered by something called Emerging Prairie. They're trying to become a demonstration plot, an ecosystem for the next generation of farming, where many of our companies never ever thought to look, but have found wonderful partnerships and have come away almost without question or without any exceptions, surprised and delighted by what's happening there. We go to Minneapolis, and I'll talk about partners there in a moment, but we visited a robotics company. We had a chance to meet with our mentors in person, so on and so forth. So this was 2 different weeks throughout last year. And the year before that was different because COVID was still a thing, and we had a border issue. So some companies kind of had the option to come, but we couldn't require it. And lastly, I'll mention our deal book. If you scan that QR code, it will link to our deal book of companies last year. I have deal books from past years too, if you're interested, but you can see the types of companies we choose and the kind of information that we try to put out there. These deal books are really intended for an investor and customer audience. So we try to highlight things about the companies that we think will matter to a US customer base. And then I want to point out that
go ahead. Would you just go back to that slide before there, and you can take a drink. I'm just going to put a plug in for Fargo as well. I had the pleasure of going out there last year and spent. I was probably out in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities and Fargo for a total of about 2 weeks, but I spent most of that in Fargo. And I walked around. It was one of the most beautiful cities I'd seen. It reminded me a lot of what Charleston or Savannah should be. It just had a real Southern charm to the facades, and you had the Red River, which bifurcates the 2 states running right through town. North Dakota State Universities, I guess, I don't know if it's their main campus or what, but something feeds right to the downtown as well. So there's tons of coffee shops, tons of bars. Everything's very clean, very vibrant. And then what the Grand Farm is doing, they partnered early on with Microsoft to start the first autonomous farm in the U.S. My peer here, Andrew from the UK, they were about 3 years ahead of us with the hands-free farm, and now it's the hectare autonomous farm there. And I did make fun of our Secretary of Ag at the time there, his team, for not following the UK's lead, but Fargo is catching up. So a plug there. Yeah. If you ever get a chance to go to Fargo, I highly recommend it. Right now is the time to visit them.
Yes, really don't go in the winter though, because surely your plane or bus will get stuck on the way. Yeah, great. Fargo's amazing, and I think such a delightful surprise to a lot of folks who've never been to this region. Okay, let's see. Doesn't want to move forward. Am I frozen for you? No? Just my slides? Oh, there we go. Okay. So I wanted to mention our partners because I think it really helps tell the story of how we do what we do. So in the Midwest, I partner with Techstars Farm to Fork, which is Techstars is a global accelerator and incubator organization, but Farm to Fork is, I think, still their only food and ag focused accelerator, and it's right here in Minneapolis. We also partner with Naturally Minnesota, which is more of, I think on its surface, a CPG ecosystem builder, but at its core, the executive director is one of the most well-connected people I know and loves to be a connector and has made some incredible partnerships happen for our companies as well. Emerging Prairie, which we've talked about in Fargo. And then on the West Coast, we partner with the other organizations here, Western Growers Association, UC California, Open Gate Partners, and of course the World AgriTech Summit. And so these partners help us find mentors. They put on sessions for us. They help organize our visits when we come in market. They take us to the startups that are worth visiting, and they help us pull in lots of folks for receptions. I mean, a little bit of everything. So it's really great, and it allows, again, our companies to get closer to a customer or investor a lot faster. That is a lot of the feedback we've heard is like, I could have built this investor list, but it would have taken me 2 years instead of, a month. And that's it for my presentation. So hopefully I touched on enough nuggets that are interesting and we can talk about more. But that's all I prepared for you all.
That was wonderful. I appreciate it. One thing I do want to ask you about was Sustera. Didn't they go through Ag Launch in Tennessee and Pete
They
Nelson's
did.
program? Because yeah, okay, good. Because I thought I saw them on one of their demo days too. Then I saw them. I didn't even realize they were a Canadian company at that time. And that's when they got on my radar.
And actually, another interesting thing about them is they were kind of born through an entity in Canada called Carrot Ventures, which essentially identifies really promising technology out of the university gate that doesn't have the right leadership in place or needs leadership, right? Because a lot of times these things are born by brilliant scientists who don't necessarily want to go on and spin out a company. So Sustera was one of those that didn't have a leader, and then they identified the CEO through work with Carrot Ventures. And I think that's kind of an interesting model that is just getting started. I think Sustera and a handful of other companies have come through that. But I would love to see something similar in the US because I think there's a huge gap with the university level research and then, actually creating a startup.
And since my namesake is on the phone here as well, one of the things I'm keenly interested in is cybersecurity protection for this, not just for protecting the IP and the crown jewels, but actually the robotics or the lines of code and things like that. And as you know, I've been talking to many stages about secure by design as well. Andrew, have you seen things similar in the UK protecting the AgTech, ag innovation space, and where cybersecurity plays a role in there?
I have to be honest with you and say I haven't really, but I'm not close enough to the sector. My remit is across all different industries, and honestly, that's one of the reasons that Andrew and I talk is because I just don't think that enough time is spent talking about ag tech and cybersecurity and the potential implications. So, I'm seeing that conversation slowly moving on in the UK and across Europe, but it's still not a big deal. So I don't get the opportunity to talk about the topic terribly much. So I can't give you any great insights into whether we're doing a good job or not, frankly. But I'd be interested, Christina, to know how you roll cybersecurity into not only the new organizations where, is it a topic that you put alongside the mentoring and alongside the tax management and the intellectual property protection? Do you talk about the operational technology cybersecurity piece? But also, how do you do that in your older technologies and your older, more established organizations? How do you keep an eye on cybersecurity and cyber resilience and make sure they're doing the right things?
I mean, to be honest, I'm learning through Andrew. You're the other Andrew, but maybe both of you now. Because that wasn't a huge focus of mine, but I've looked into it more since going to some of the events that Andrew has put on. And I've since identified some folks that I used to work with in a prior life, but that are also located here in the Midwest that have gone on to cybersecurity, specifically in agriculture. And I think it's something we should be weaving in more because people aren't thinking about it. I mean, I don't need to tell you that, but it can be such a threat that is just lurking behind the scenes that nobody's talking about. I think especially in agriculture, we're not talking about it because it doesn't seem like an ag topic, right?
Yeah.
But I do think more folks that are in the tech space see it. And so much of ag technology comes from outside of agriculture. I was actually just at a conference the last 2 days this week in Des Moines, Iowa, called Tech Hub Live. And it was, we had to go around and kind of talk about our background and who was who. And most people came into it outside of agriculture. They came from a tech background, which validated what I thought was the case. But I was, I wasn't always sure if I had the data to back that up. It's just what it felt like to me until all these people were in a room saying, yeah, I don't actually know about agriculture. So those folks, I think, hold promise for the future of cybersecurity in agriculture.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how you're intending to push it forward and raise the profile, because I think every country needs to do the same thing. I think every country that I've spoken to is on the same level as you are. I think just coming to that cusp of realization, the fact that lots of other industries have implemented cybersecurity controls and agriculture is lagging behind. So if you see good practices, please do let me know what they are so I can try and push them across Europe as well as I get opportunities.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
And Christina, we have a question there in the chat box, and rather than read a whole bunch of sentences, it won't take me too long to read. You can read with your eyes faster than I can speak it.
All right, fast. Yes, this is great, fascinating. Let me just scroll up a little bit.
Product shop. Water management, because I mean, similar to agriculture, I don't think water gets the same attention from a cybersecurity risk perspective either. So, I mean, water is critical.
Oh, I think I'm reading there we go. Yeah. So can you tell me how to say your name correctly? Lies?
Yeah, Lies, yes.
Oh, good.
Hi everybody.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining me. This is great. I don't know your company, so I'm always excited to learn about new entities in Canada. And I would say that the program is open to firms. We're kind of to be honest, we're rethinking what we're doing a little bit for the next year, because since we started, lots of these accelerators have popped up in Canada, whereas that nothing existed previously. And as well, we have now my counterpart in Mexico City runs an AgTech accelerator, again, for Canadian companies. So I said, we really need to take a step back and think about how we can all streamline our programs and not duplicate. And so that will, I think, change potentially how we think about things. Typically, we've been asking for folks to be raising a seed to Series A, like I had mentioned, but that could change. So, and the reason for that is because, at least historically, we've spent so much time on raising capital, with experts coming in and talking about how to build your data room and when to share it and how to find the right investor. And so if you're not raising, that part is wasted. It's a waste of time for you. But it could change. And I will say that my counterpart in Mexico, that is not a focus, because Mexico doesn't have the VC flow that we do in the US. And so if we create this streamlined program, that one has always been more customer focused. And similarly in Canada, they do a lot of focus on the toolbox building. So we don't need to duplicate all that. So I would say that yes, when we open again, you should definitely apply. And we can kind of talk through the specifics too on because we want it to be worth the time for you as well. It's a lot of time. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, we build software and hardware for companies, but also recently we started to dig into the funding programs in Canada, such as MAPAC in Quebec. They voted $100 million Canadian dollar program to promote sustainability and AgTech. And our founder actually is a former startup owner. So we have access to funding, but we're also looking for like an entry point to the ecosystem to be able to develop solution and products that will match the needs of the ecosystem. So that's why we are interested in the type of programs you are promoting. And my question also, if I can ask, what would be for a new company interested to jump into AgTech, what would be the first step in terms of application? Would you recommend to stay in touch with you, or do you recommend to apply to any program across Canada, for instance?
I mean, yes, but I'm happy to chat with you and have a longer conversation about how we can help you. I mean, at the end of the day, anyone in my role in the US is there to support Canadian companies with a US interest. If you find that actually the Northeast US is more where you belong, I would probably pass you to a colleague. But if the Midwest is of interest, just because I don't have those contacts. But I think also we can talk about ecosystem partners in Canada. So I think Zone AgTech could be interesting for you. But also, I keep saying also, I'm sorry, you kind of fit into the clean tech space as well. So another organization I had posted on one of my slides was called Foresight Canada, and they're really more in that clean tech space. We also have a clean tech accelerator. I don't run that program, but we often have companies that, we have to make a decision. Are they ag tech? Are they clean tech? And they fit in both in some ways, but one more. But I think if you want to just kind of talk through how you would fit into the ag tech space, I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you. And I think Andrew just put my contact information. So yeah, so send me an email and we can have a chat.
Okay, I will send you an email end of the day with my colleagues, okay, and with some questions and more description about what we would like to do and what we've been doing so far.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to it. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions since we can speak up here? Because I certainly have one here as well. Well, absent any questions then. So which of the current cohort portfolio companies either coming in or currently are you most excited about and why?
Oof.
Or maybe well, give me 2 or 3 if you can't pick your favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I always go to the ones that are like finding success here because that's at the end of the day what it's all about for me. So I do love working with Sustair because they have just come in full bore into North Dakota in particular and Minnesota, Iowa. I also think SciGriff is a really interesting company. I don't know if you remember them, Andrew, from some of the pitching events, but they've been on my radar for a couple of years now. They kind of sit in between food tech, ag tech. They have, it was born out of the University of Guelph, technology derived from sour cherries that serves as sort of, the founder always describes it as UPS for like drug delivery. So it better delivers nutrients in the sense of ag tech as well as nutraceuticals and supplements for humans. And so they're coming out with a product, I think, right, like any day now that should be available, I think, via Amazon that is for human health, that helps lower cholesterol via a better delivery system of the necessary nutraceuticals. But especially I love the founder, and that's half of it for me, right? It's got to be a great technology, but it also has to be somebody who's really engaged, who's really good at getting people's attention and likable and, makes a good meeting. And so Sean with SciGriff has been a wonderful person to work with as well. I'm seeing everyone is talking about AI currently. Are you seeing AI arriving? Absolutely. I feel like every company has some AI machine learning component to it. Another company we had last year called New Peak, they are a robotic system for strawberry picking, and it's tons of AI because the robot is superior to all other options right now because it learns how to pick at night. It can pick consistently, whereas obviously humans have to sleep. It can find the ones that are the ripest and those that are not. And now they're developing, again, the learning to be applicable to cucumbers and tomatoes, and it's all AI based and a really cool machine. But that all these companies have a software base as well. So I think that is the future. And again, that's a reason why most of this stuff is not born in agriculture. It's coming from outside, and then someone says, aha, I can apply this to agriculture. I should, because there's a lot of money flowing in that direction right now, or at least there was. I don't know. Now it's
that actually leads to my next question here. We hear a lot about trials, feeding animals different things to see what kind of outcome there will be. And it seems the big thing right now is feeding seaweed to cows for methane reduction. Have you guys looked at that? Are you seeing a trial? What do you think?
I know there was one company in that space, whether they fed it to cows or other livestock, I don't remember, but that applied last year. And I think they weren't quite ready That's always kind of a difficult thing. If they're really a true startup and need some extra support in Canada before coming to the US, we have to pass. But seaweed in general has been, I mean, I think since the day I started this job, which has been 8 years now, seaweed from Canada, that's a huge industry for them that's transcends everything from animal to human health and is very plentiful there and very nutritious. So I've worked with companies in the food space as well. And I feel like recently, and I'm not going to remember the company name, but it's been coming back. Like I'm hearing more about some of these companies that maybe 5 years ago weren't quite ready to have those conversations in the US. And maybe the US wasn't paying enough attention yet either. Sometimes we're not there yet, and you need to hear enough buzz before the buyers are interested. But I haven't seen this one that's specific for cows, so you'll have to send that to me if you don't mind.
Oh, I can do better than that. The CEO is on this call. That was a softball kind of him. And he just posted a question in the chat box as well.
Oh, regulations for feed houses. Okay. Yep. Well, nice to meet you, Steve. I'm glad I said nice things about seaweed.
It wasn't us that applied. We happen to know who that was, and you are correct. They are not even close to ready, but turns out we are, and we grow and manufacture stuff in Australia and New Zealand. Although we're a US headquartered company, we do it there because it's the native home of the species and a variety of other reasons, including the fact that regulation-wise, we're able to not only sell it, but actually make mitigation claims of methane/greenhouse gases.
Amazing. Awesome.
Not sure what the situation is in Canada. You've got, a good healthy number of 12, 15 or so million cows, for which this could actually help significantly impact Canada's total greenhouse gas emissions profile. But regulations are an evolving thing as countries get closer and closer to not even coming close to their greenhouse gas Paris commitment goals in here. Canada's no exception to that. It's not singling you out. Everyone's in the same case. And so as we do that, what we're finding is that regulations in different parts of the world, it's not that they're softening, they're not making it easier. It's not necessarily to make it skip steps, but they're getting practical about what is the data that exists. And instead of, well, you need to do 3 studies in my country and my cows under my circumstances, there's recognition of being able to do that. So as we work, for example, in a couple of Asian countries now, we do so with large global scaling partners. There's a $60 billion global foods company that happens to be headquartered in one specific Asian country, who understand culture, who understand the way things are done. As they're working with the government about how to do this, we have a very streamlined process, and it's become very practical. No one's cutting corners. Ensuring safety is paramount, number one, for the animals and for humans, but they've become very practical because they want to be the first in Asia to be able to show the way. US has now a bipartisan bill, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. Never thought I'd see the case in 2023 that they would actually agree to create a completely new category for these types of products, which seaweed in terms of methane mitigation and ruminants would be included. And it's passing its way through now. It'll pass without any question. And the new category is designed to eliminate you having to go to the FDA and live with a regulated process that's an unknown period of time to one that's very time-bound and limited to accelerate the use so that, the US could look to meet its 30% methane mitigation goals that it has signed up for, that the Biden administration signed up for.
So Steve, just for time purposes here, what it sounds like you're saying is you would like Christina to get you into trials there in Canada as quickly and as speedily as possible.
It's not so much on trials. We can do that now. The issue is what are the regulations, and you can't just front up to a couple of and again, I'm being pretty blunt. You can't just front up to a couple of middle level paid administrative regulators and say, what's your process? That's the worst thing you could possibly ever do. It's really a discussion at a high level about how does this approach, not even necessarily us, how does this approach facilitate Canada's pathway to greenhouse gas reductions while providing additional GDP input to an existing industry and a whole variety of other benefits. That's the conversation, not trials. We can do the trials tomorrow if we wanted to. That's not the issue.
Okay, that's too bad because I had an easy answer for that one. So just to be clear, you're based in Australia, is that right?
No, I live in Las Vegas actually. So the company is headquartered it's a US headquartered company. We have a wholly owned manufacturing subsidiary in Australia and wholly owned manufacturing subsidiary in New Zealand, because that is the place where it is the least expensive to produce and manufacture, as it turns out as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can definitely try to get you some information on the regulations. That would probably be something I would want to confirm with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada first, because they own all that policy side of things. Trials would be great in Canada just because they have an amazing program called SHRED, Research and Development Tax Credit Program, that is very generous. So just throwing that out there. But I think it would be great to raise with my colleagues at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, because in these cases where maybe it hasn't been asked before or in the right way, it at least guides their thinking. I mean, I've had a lot of this in the plant protein sector recently, where it's like they don't actually know how to label milk that is not made from cows but has lactose, right? Like this is maybe a new category. And so if nothing else, it's the more they hear these questions, the more they're going to have to come up with answers for it and create regulation.
And I think that the point for them, which is why I said at a higher level than a middle level bureaucrat who's been in that role, and they're paid to mitigate risk. I get it, right? That's their role. So if you go ask them, they say, well, you need to do these 10 things because that's what you would have to do. Well, 9 of them will already exist in other geographies. So the question isn't necessarily about what do we need to do. I already know that because the company you talked about already asked that question, and they shouldn't have. We already know what the answer is. The question is, how does the government want to think about greenhouse gas mitigation across all of what goes on in Canada and meeting its goals? And if you've got 15 million cows and you could mitigate it in all of those cows, what is the magnitude of that impact? And I could sit and tell people what that is. And is that meaningful? And does that facilitate an impetus to say, how do we marshal the right folks around the table to say, how do we make this happen? Not in an unsafe way, but how do we facilitate the pathway and the progress to being able to do that? That's the conversation that's the important one.
Well, and one little tidbit I can add that I think is quite telling, even though it doesn't sound like a big deal, is so Canada has, similar to the US, something like a farm bill, but it's called the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, CAP. And it's similar to Farm Bill, again, reinstated every 4 or 5 years, renegotiated with new funding programs. And for the first time, they've added an SCAP, Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, which for a government to add a letter to an acronym is like actually a really big deal. Like that is very telling. And it's at the beginning. To me, that says this is going to guide a lot of what comes out of that. So I would watch for that too, to see what do they fund, because that can really tell you where their priorities lie. Where are they putting more money? I'm not actually sure when we're going to hear the final on the SCAP, but it's soon. So, and if you want more specific information or contacts, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, and
it's not really an answer, but
Andrew has my contact details, so he can get those to you. But again, sometimes policymakers make decisions on what they know, but if they don't know that a product that could do this is actually we're building the world's first commercial scale facility now. So if they don't know it's imminent in terms of its ability to do it, and they think, well, it's an R&D experiment or companies are way too early, they're never going to include it in their thinking because it's, well, I'll wait for the next group of people to come in or something. So this is imminent. And again, getting it into someone's lexicon is critical because they now know that's a possibility. It wasn't last year. It wasn't ever before. So,
anyway, that makes sense. I agree completely. As someone who straddles sort of policy and not policy, I see both sides of that, and I get what you're saying completely. So
well, back to the harder questions here, because that's another nice lead in here to who takes responsibility for what on a global level. Andrew had the question there. You know, we have certain agencies in the U.S. that help us out with protecting our food and ag supply chain, and sometimes they communicate well, and sometimes they don't. But there's not one. It's broken across multiple places. Does Canada have that sort of point person or point organization that coordinates this? And
you know, to be honest, I don't know. I don't know for sure, and I will look into it. But I think what I can say is that it's a similar ugly stepchild in Canada, the sector of agriculture, where responsibility is shared across entities more than in other cases. Even within my own job, I report to more different groups than like a person in my position who's dealing with life sciences. It's a very clear line. I've got Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. I've got the provinces. There's Health Canada, which similar to USDA, FDA, like they cross over. But in terms of risk, and I know this is probably coming from sort of that cybersecurity perspective, as well as like, what if a major disaster happens, or, you know, more with the grain supply coming out of Eastern Europe, who's watching that? For sure, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is part of it, but whether there's somebody more in the security space, I don't know, but I'd be happy to find out for you.
You know, yes, thank you. And I think it's just critically important. The reason I stress that is obviously water and food are fairly important to us as a species, and it doesn't take too long for them to have an impact in our daily lives if they're not there. But if you do get up that chain, and there's some people that want to have some questions or conversations, let me know, and we can bring them up to speed. What we try to do down here, and share notes, and again, having people like Andrew and some other friends out there, it's always good if we're at least trying to keep the conversation alive. Very similar to what Steve said, sometimes we're changing lexicon and bringing attention to something that's right there in front of us that we haven't noticed before.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's good. I'm sorry I don't have a clear answer, but it's an interesting question.
You fielded it well. Well done. All right, I'm going to stop here.